Hello, I welcome you for the current session. In this session, we'll be discussing about the different methodologies adopted in economics for the purpose of study and for the purpose of deriving various laws and theories. I, Rupali Gupta, welcome you for the current session. Broadly speaking, there are four methodologies in economics which have been adopted. Firstly, deductive and inductive approach. Then, positive normative approach. Next, static and dynamic approach, general equilibrium and partial equilibrium approach. Now let's look into further what are these approaches. The first one being deductive and inductive approach. When we are talking about deductive and inductive approach, what do we understand by it? Deductive is a method of reasoning where we are going to arrive at conclusions, or we are deriving inferences, or we are framing laws and principles based on a methodology of arriving at conclusions by understanding the behavior of universe and applying it to the individual scenario. That is, we accept certain general facts and test it on individual scenarios whether it works or not. But on the contrary, inductive method is where we try to get conclusions after understanding different individual behaviors and come to a conclusion which is applicable universally to all the common situations, common scenarios. And hence, deductive method is called as the abstract method, analytical method, a priori method. But inductive method is called as an empirical method because in this individualistic data has been collected. Based on that data, conclusions have been derived. Now, moving on further to the steps that are involved in deductive method are initially we define a problem, we make certain assumptions, and after making assumptions we reach to certain hypotheses. These are the hypotheses that need to be tested. Then statistical methods are adopted for testing those hypotheses. On the other hand, in case of inductive method, the problems are defined and the data has been collected because we are understanding the individual behavior from different scenarios. Observations have been made from the collected data, then inferences are driven. Moving on to the next method, that is positive and normative approach. This is also called as positive science and normative science. In positive science approach, we try to understand the relationship between different variables. Positive science is an approach which describes the subject as it is. It does not recommend, it does not suggest. But in case of normative science, it recommends, it suggests what is right, what is wrong, along with the description. Hence, positive science approach is called as a descriptive science approach, whereas normative science is called as a prescriptive science approach. Because positive science just talks about what it is, but normative science deals with what ought to be, what it should be in future, how it should be. Moving on further to the third approach. In the third approach, we'll be understanding about static and dynamic approach. In case of static and dynamic approach, we give importance to the time element. As mentioned earlier also, during static approach, we are understanding the working of a particular economic variable at a particular point of time, ignoring its variations in different time periods. But in case of dynamic approach, we are trying to understand the working of economic variables under different time periods in order to understand its behavior, in order to understand the trend in economic variable. Moving on to the last approach, that is general equilibrium approach and partial equilibrium approach. In case of general equilibrium approach and partial equilibrium approach, we try to focus on certain elements. In partial equilibrium approach, all the economic phenomena are not studied at a similar point of time. But in case of general equilibrium approach, various phenomena are studied together. But when we talk about partial and general equilibrium approach, both are having its significance, relevance, and application depending upon the nature of problem and depending upon the hypothesis. But both the approaches were developed by different economists. Partial equilibrium approach was developed by Professor Alfred Marshall, whereas general equilibrium approach was developed by French economist Leon Walras. So this is a brief introduction about the approaches. So let me remind you, what are the four approaches that we have looked into today? Deductive and inductive method, positive science and normative science approach, static and dynamic approach, partial equilibrium and general equilibrium approach. So good luck, keep studying, all the best.